You've got here a really amazing room full of experts, thought leaders, researchers, workers, unions, and some funders who are really thinking about the deployment of AI in workplaces. Something about what we're seeing now in terms of the harms that are already happening and that could happen, but also what it looks like to have worker voice in the deployment of AI and what a positive solution set might look like. So now that I've finished filibustering, we are really lucky to have with us Representative Chris Deluzio. He is Democrat from Western Pennsylvania's 17th District. He's a key voice on the Hill advocating for American workers and their economic empowerment. One of the things that I've been most personally excited to see in this moment of a little bit of confusion and chaos is that he is a champion of a new populist economic patriotism that challenges the status quo of elite corporate interests and fights for an inspiring vision of shared prosperity. He has a skepticism of consolidated corporate power and a desire to center workers' interests, and that shines through in his work on AI. Representative Deluzio introduced the Stop Spying Bosses Act, and he was co-lead on the No Robot Bosses Act in the House, which, if passed, would protect the humanity and rights of workers by regulating the use, abuse, and abuse of AI by employers. These bills would have also established a Technology and Worker Protection Division in the Department of Labor. So Representative Deluzio, thank you so much for joining us today.
So thanks for having me join. This is a group of some pretty smart folks who I think have a lot to say about what happens in the space. So I'm glad to be in conversation with you and looking forward to it.
Great. Just to start off, what has driven your interest in AI? You've done some legislating here. Are you hearing about these issues from your constituents directly?
Yes. And part of what's driven my interest is, look, I'm very proud that I'm a labor guy down here. I say down here because I'm from Pittsburgh, and this is down for us. And so that means you think about things through a lens of how does this affect workers. I think these tools are powerful. I think we're already seeing them deployed in a range of workplaces, in a range of settings, in a range of, say, the spectrum of responsibility. And I think that I hear from people who are worried about whether their jobs are going to be automated away. I hear from people who are worried about whether some powerful tool is making a decision that's affecting how much they pay for something, affecting a service that they've earned or they expect to get, a healthcare decision or a health insurance decision. I could go on and on. And so it's not just people who are worried about their livelihoods or their jobs. It's people who are worried about their interactions with our government, with a company for a service they need or a product. It's touching a lot of our economy already. And I was mentioning to you, Elizabeth, as we were coming in, my part of the world, we're also seeing the data center side of this happen and be built out in a place like Western Pennsylvania. So it's happening in that side of things too. So this is it's already here. And I think the Congress has been too slow to do anything about it. I don't think this Congress is going to do much of anything. If they do something, it won't be responsible. But I think this is already happening, and we need some action from Congress to make sure that the people whose livelihoods and jobs are most affected in the workplace have a role in shaping these tools and how they're used, and for us to put some guardrails up. Because the absence of those guardrails, I think we know what those harms can be. We already see some of them, and I think they'll only get worse as these tools become more powerful and more prevalent.
So we'll get to Congress and its ability to do or not anything later. But one other question I have is actually, you represent everybody in your district. So you represent workers. You also represent business owners. Do you hear from business owners about the deployment of AI? And if so, what are you hearing from them, and how does it compare to what you are hearing from workers in your district?
Always hard to summarize, right? There's no one opinion people have. And I think what I sense from especially smaller business owners is like, look, if this can save me money and help me deliver a better service or customer experience, great. If it's going to be something that's used by the more powerful corporate entity somewhere else in my supply chain, then I'm going to pay for the cost of that. That's also a part of this. And I think, again, people want to use technology to make their business better. That's a pretty basic assumption and the thing I hear, especially on the small business side. And I think there's a fear of how do I embrace a technology that could help my workers do their jobs more efficiently, perhaps, on the altruistic sense. And the other side of that coin is people who want to get rid of jobs because they can automate them away. And I know there's an interest in both of those things. And again, I come back to these are powerful tools. They can be very powerful. And the question of how they are deployed is one that is open. And we're going to see a lot of different applications, good and bad. And we've already seen good and bad applications of this. My governor, Josh Shapiro, did a pilot with, I think, SEIU, OpenAI, and maybe some others about testing how you could use some of these tools for public services with the workers who actually would be doing the work. How could this make their lives, how could this streamline or not the work they do? Would this mean more efficient deployment of, or more efficient delivery of a public service here? And I think from my understanding, that pilot was successful and they're continuing down that path, but labor is part of it. Workers are not just an afterthought of this. You know, my governor thought hey, let's have workers from the beginning guiding this with this powerful tool. In this case, I think it was OpenAI. But they're doing this together, and I think that is a model that we should see more of have the workers in the room who can guide this, who are human in the loop, who are helping shape and develop these tools that make their parts of their jobs better. I think we all want government to be more efficient. Like, that's a goal we should all just have. And if the workers who are doing this can help guide this, great. So like those are the kinds of examples of this I want to see and I want to see more of. And I think government can, I mean, look, government's a pretty large employer on top of everything else. So government could really drive some of this. And I say that knowing that our public sector union brothers and sisters are under siege down here. But I'm glad to see a positive example of this in Pennsylvania.
I love that point. We were hearing earlier today about a paper that the Roosevelt Institute actually just put out yesterday about public entities and the use of AI, and ways in which it can really degrade service and put the burden back on citizens if not deployed with some understanding of what are the pain points, both from the worker side and from the consumer side, and how can we use the tools to solve the real problems that folks are having and not sort of going off in the wrong direction. So that's very on point for some of our discussion from earlier today. So now on to our everyone's favorite institution, Congress.
Is it really anyone's favorite? I mean, I'd be surprised if it's anyone's favorite.
So I'd like to get your perspective on the federal policymaking landscape. So, you know, granting the particular landscape we are in right now, which is, you know, Congress has been focused on other priorities. But in the meantime, you have been thinking about what kinds of issues are ripe for legislative language. What could we actually write a bill on, and who could we get to support it? So first of all, just specifically on the Stop Spying Bosses Act and the No Robot Bosses Act, the two that you put forward, what about those bills was most important to you as you were thinking about leadership on those issues?
Well, so let's take each of them, and one of them is about the kinds of data that these tools can vacuum up and then use to stymie an organizing effort, right? And I think that is a risk in a lot of workplaces, especially workplaces where there is data, right? Where we're not out in the job site necessarily, where maybe there's an office worker environment where they're trying to organize, and surveillance of keystrokes and things that people are doing on their phones and devices is a big part of the job, and that's a lot of data that a company that wants the union bust can manipulate. And so this goes to, I think, that fear of this is a powerful tool that I think could be used to stymie union or worker freedom to organize a union if workers want. And the other side, on the hiring piece, look, people should embrace technology and use it responsibly. The bill on hiring just talks about having a person still in the loop. It's a pretty basic kind of an expectation people have, that you aren't just having technology on its own make something like a hiring decision, to make sure that there are still people involved in these decisions. Part of this interest for me, I worked at Pitt Cyber. It's an institute at the University of Pittsburgh before I was in Congress. And one of the things we took on was a task force on public algorithms, government algorithms. This was in the, 2018, 2019 or so. those types of tools, automated decision-making tools, or whatever we might call them, have only grown in government. And we saw 5, 6, 7 years ago, even then, a lot of risks about how when those tools don't have humans involved, the kinds of biases and errors that are baked into the data, or how the data is trained, and what those outcomes look like. And again, it's only gotten worse given how powerful the tools are. And so to make sure that there are people involved in something as sensitive as hiring seems pretty straightforward. But as you know, things don't move through the Congress too easily.
So I have 2 follow-up questions to that. The first is just a little bit, can you tell us what it was like to talk to your colleagues about these bills? Sort of how educated are your colleagues on some of these issues? How interested are they? How motivated are they to tackle them? Or, does this seem like a far-off problem and they are, not focused on it?
It's a mix, and I think people understand that whatever tools might be at the disposal of a boss or a powerful corporation to stymie an organizing effort, they're going to use them. And that we need to update. I mean, look, we should pass the PRO Act tomorrow, and that's a big part of this. But I think there's an awareness, certainly among my colleagues who are pro-labor, that our labor laws have been defanged, and the playing field is not even close to equal between employers and workers. And so I think even for those who aren't that familiar with the technological side of this, understand intuitively that a powerful tool can be manipulated and abused by an employer that wants to block an organizing effort. And so there's a receptivity to something like this.
So my second question is a little bit about the pace of Congress that you raised. So the thing that strikes me about both of these bills are, these types of decision-making algorithms have been around for a good while, right? This is a sort of the beginning of the AI conversation that we have had about how these sort of algorithms feed into hiring and firing management, and we're still just starting to talk about ways to regulate them. And now comes along ChatGPT, large language models, and a whole other set and suite of AI tools, and ones with which, if you believe the hype, will be much more revolutionary about the nature of work than some of these decision-making tools. That, the decision-making tools, what I kind of hear you saying is, for folks who think about worker power, we are very used to the idea that management has a whole suite of tools to control, micromanage, and take power away from workers, and here is one more tool, and so we want to make sure that we are getting ahead of it and regulating it. Large language models, again, if you believe the hype, are threatening to be a much more revolutionary kind of change in the nature of work, potentially. That was a long wind-up to say. I guess I'll start by asking, how well-equipped do you think Congress is to think about a policy framework for something like large language models and generative AI as it enters the workforce?
That's a great question. And part of me thinks not equipped at all, right? I don't want the current majorities in the House and the Senate crafting that legislation right now. That's a very just frank observation of where my Republican counterparts are on a lot of these issues. But there are places that still function in the Congress. We marked up the defense bill yesterday. There are places, especially where national security is involved, and I think the development of some of these tools implicates national security in big ways. I think China is proceeding down its own path on these tools, and I suspect the kinds of guardrails that we will want will be non-existent there. And so there are some pockets of the Congress that I think can responsibly think about this and maybe work here. But again, I don't want to paint too rosy of a picture, and let's go back to, 3 weeks ago, and what was in the version of the president's one big ugly bill, which was a moratorium on states doing anything to regulate AI. Thankfully, that came out, and I think that's maybe a source of optimism that it came out. There are a lot of terrible things in that bill that didn't come out, but that did. And so maybe that gives me a little bit of hope that people understand we need to do something, at a minimum, not block states from doing something here to protect people. And I guess, it's a big question, so let me give you maybe a bigger answer too. There, of course, on top of all of this is the risk of automating away people's jobs and livelihoods. and using these tools to take away those jobs. I was thinking about this before I came in. I think from the beginning of me having a website as a candidate for Congress, which was only, 4 years ago or so, I had some line on there, I can't remember exactly what it was, of a little punch at the shot of people who were fine with outsourcing jobs away, who the line to people was telling them to go learn to code. And I said, I'm never going to be out there telling people that you should feel fine that your jobs have been taken away and that you should go learn to code. And the great irony of this is the people whose jobs are now most likely to be eliminated by these machines are the people who are coding. And I think there is something important in that, that things have come around from the same folks who've been comfortable outsourcing and automating away jobs, that the thing they told people to do is going to be automated away. And maybe we should have a different way that we think about this, which is that workers are at the heart of it and not just an afterthought who will bear the cost of these kinds of tools and decisions.
Well, I would like to say I love that answer, but I don't, because it's like all the jobs are going away. But you did hit on something that I have thought a lot about, which is whether there is an opportunity is in sort of shared pain, sort of, in the sense that there are, what we would traditionally think of as blue-collar jobs, where people are worried about, their jobs being automated away, and there are what we think of as white-collar jobs, coders, computer scientists, et cetera, where people are worried about whether or not they'll get a job when they graduate college or what have you. And I do wonder whether there is actually a moment of more identity of interest between different segments of the workforce than we sometimes see, and the kind of divisions that you're hinting at here, right? Who cares about your dirty old blue collar manufacturing job anyway? Go learn to code was sort of the subtext of that kind of. And now who cares about your dirty old coding job? It's going to go away. Is there an opportunity there for a broader swath of people to think of themselves as workers writ large rather than this or that kind of worker who have an interest in seeing how this technological future is shaped?
I think absolutely, because I think the risk to a range of jobs is very real, and people whose jobs are in the knowledge economy, where the power of these tools can replicate some of that thinking and analysis that you spend years learning and honing, are really at risk. And I think understand and know that. And I think that realization, that fact that, again, the jobs that were supposed to be the most lucrative and safest in this economy where everyone was being told to go to college and people were demeaning the trades, which never made sense to me. Those folks being at risk because of this technology, I do think is a moment of political awakening, that maybe workers, no matter what kind of work they do, have some shared interests and should want our government to do something about it. I think that's happening in real time. And I think about my part of the world, which has manufacturing, which has energy jobs, which has eds and meds jobs in the knowledge economy, as it were. Those jobs are at risk from these tools. We have big health insurance companies in my part of the world. They would love to use these tools to automate away those decision making, or those decisions that people make now. And so the point to me is there are lots of people's jobs who I think they probably felt secure and safe, who pursued a path that our society pushed them down, that are very much at risk because of these tools.
So maybe another sad point of optimism in a otherwise not so optimistic conversation. You mentioned again the AI preemption provision that came out of the big ugly bill. For those of us who don't walk the halls of Congress every day, can you talk a little bit about what the conversation in Congress was about AI regulation and preemption, how people are thinking about it? I think the vote for that was 99-1. Yeah. Obviously, people are coming to that from very different perspectives. Can you just talk a little bit about what were the politics around that, and if there are any interesting dynamics that folks who think about the policy development that needs to happen? Are there any sort of interesting alliances, divisions, et cetera, that we should be thinking about?
Well, you mentioned 99-1, which meant the Senate, and the Senate, doesn't deign to consider what we think in the House too often for folks who follow the Congress much. But look, the vote speaks for itself, and I think the pushback was pretty severe, and the fact that you got 99 out of 100, I think Ted Cruz was the one holdout because it was ultimately his, I think it was his provision. It tells you something, and I think maybe an interesting part of an appetite to confront tech's power and confront big tech. I've been thinking about social media and did something at home in the district recently around asking my school districts what they're doing about smartphones in the classroom. And I bring that up because it's a place where the politics are a little scrambled. You've got some states with Republican governors and legislatures who I think are ahead of some states with Democratic governors and legislatures on thinking about protecting kids in particular from some of the harms of these powerful tools, in this case, maybe social media or smartphones. And so to me, it tells me there is an opportunity where there's an appetite, at least from some on the right, to think about big tech in a critical way. I know there's an appetite from some on the left to do that too, and maybe there's something there. And so we should pursue that, because the reality of Washington, even with full Republican control, there aren't that many avenues for them to pass things without any Democratic input. And I suspect we'll have a different control of at least the House maybe after 2026. So we'll be in divided government is my expectation. And you're going to need to be able to get some support in both parties. I'm not naive that we're all going to get along and pass big sweeping legislation, but I think there are some places, and maybe it's around, as a start, thinking about kids and the impact of social media and tech on kids, but I think there's more that could be built off from that. And maybe it's around some guardrails with a national security lens to get the conversation going, to get some Republican buy-in, which you'll need to pass this stuff.
So you're in a room of researchers, policymakers, in addition to, as I said, some union folks, some workers. When you think about both the harms that may come from AI deployment in the workplace, but also potentially, what it would look like to shape tech deployment for the better. Sitting here as a lawmaker, what would you say to us about the ways in which we should be spending our time, the questions we should be asking? How can we be building towards something that will make you doing your job easier?
I think the second part of that is, how can this be deployed to make lives better for people is a useful part of this. Because I think if we are going to legislate, I don't want to kill and stymie a technology that could help society flourish. I'd like to see guardrails that protect us, but we also want to be putting these tools in place that can help people. And so I think that side of it, it's easy to come up with something that's restrictive, but then you also can't have it be overly restrictive. So helping lawmakers understand where there are real benefits. And that's why I come back to, and I mentioned the example with in Pennsylvania with state employees. That's a powerful model, I think, of folks who are using these tools, trying them out, piloting it, seeing what works or what didn't. If it didn't work, then abandon it. It seemed like it did, and they're continuing to experiment and create processes and rules and standards in the workplace, at least for Pennsylvania state employees. That's an important, I think, approach that we can learn from that could shape how we might legislate. And maybe it's as straightforward as thinking about federal employees as a starting block. I'm not optimistic this administration will be too friendly there. But again, I think helping us understand, I think there's an obvious impulse and plenty of research and efforts on what the harms are going to be or already are, less so where this can be harnessed to help workers and workplaces be better. And I think that's a place, or maybe that's a place of opportunity.
I appreciate you saying that, because I think, you can speak for yourself, but one thing I think about when I imagine folks who need to go back and run on something. Sometimes you can run on anger and frustration, but also you need to run on a vision of the future and what you're promising to people. And people don't want to stay in a place of anxiety and anger. They also want something to desire and want and work for.
And I don't think you have much credibility if, it's just an argument of, well, we can't, no, don't electrify the lamps because we have a gas, we want to have the gas-powered lamps. It can't just be anti-technology. And I think finding ways where this technology can be useful and helpful, great. That also gives more legitimacy to the argument of there are real harms that we should be putting guardrails around and protecting against. I think you've got more credibility when you're grounding your arguments in reality and finding places where this can help workers sift through tons of data, right? To use their limited time on the job to do things more efficiently or effectively. If that's how these tools can be harnessed, great, but workers are going to drive that. It's not going to be me, and I don't think it's going to be powerful employers who want to squeeze everything they can out of their workers.
So I think one last question for you. As you look to the next 2-4 years, whether it is in the sort of political timeline that we live in, whether it is in the way that we think about the deployment of technology and what might be happening, do you see any moments that we should be thinking about, any parts of the timeline that we should be focused on, any opportunities that we should be thinking about seizing? Sort of one of the things that I think about is persuasion windows. When are there moments that we can take advantage of to help shift the way people think about things, to be able to, use a moment to push something forward? So are there moments that you think about as you're thinking about, whether it's AI or not, your overall agenda? Are there moments that you're thinking about as those persuasion or opportunity moments?
Yeah, and maybe I'm connecting some dots on the tools and then the power generation that will be needed that's already happening to power these tools. So my part of the world, Western Pennsylvania, we've already had, not in my district, but one coal-powered plant that's coming back online. Now will be gas to power data centers to power these tools. There's more money coming in. There's a nuclear facility in the old 3 Mile Island that's now resuming operations, I think, with Microsoft long-term contract. So the point is, I think there's a moment of the energy side of this is connected, and the energy demands and costs are tremendous, and thus there's a risk for whether we're going to continue to have emissions that aren't sustainable for our planet, or whether we go a different path. Which communities might benefit from this, and if it's really benefit or if it's just a short-term construction benefit. All of those things to me are linked, and those questions are being answered in real time right now. There are parts of my district, Aliquippa in my district, used to have 10,000, 15,000 people work at J&L steel mill that no longer exist, that they're likely to get a version or some data center or some power plant to power a data center at that old site. That's a big deal for a place like Aliquippa, but also if it's not done responsibly, they're going to carry a lot of harm for that. And I say that to make the point that this is already happening and that the impacts on our grid are already starting to be felt, will continue. And so it's not just the application of these tools on a workplace or in a health insurance decision or whatever the application might be. The other side of it is playing out right now too. And so I think communities, workers, whether in the trades who are going to build these factories or maybe other unions who might work in them once these places are done, and the workers who might then see the application of these tools in their workplace, it is already happening. I think they have more shared interests than probably folks get, and that's maybe an interesting inflection point for all of us.
I told you that was going to be my last question, but I actually, it's sort of a fascinating case study. It's not the subject of most of what we're talking about today, but since this is real time happening in your district, are there things that are happening on the ground right now around that data center that either give you concern about the way that things are going to turn out or give you hope? And, what is making the difference? If you have folks here who also think about this stuff, what are the things that you think ought to be replicated other places or that you're worried are going in the wrong direction?
There's still a lot of uncertainty. And so I think, look, I don't know any elected office holder who's not in the business of jobs, right? You want jobs. And certainly say that my building trades friends are excited about construction jobs that will come here. And I do think there's an opportunity. I think there's round agreement that we need more power on the grid. I don't think there's agreement that we need to continue to have emissions at the kind of rate we've had. And so my answer is it's yet to be written whether this is going to be done responsibly or not. I'm a big proponent of nuclear power, for instance, right? Nuclear power is a pretty reliable source of energy that has a huge startup cost to bring online. And so I think the energy issues, communities being safe, workers, I think these issues are all being impacted by this. And I don't have a prediction for where this goes, but it's happening now, right now, in a place like Western Pennsylvania.
Well, I think with that, we so appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to talk to us a little bit about what's really happening out there on your side of Washington. Thank you for what you do. And yeah, we appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.